We want you to know.
In the dimly lit intensive care units of northern Germany during the early 2000s, as hospital staff moved briskly between beds and machines hummed rhythmically with the fragile sounds of life, a story of horror was silently unfolding, a story so vast and so deeply disturbing that it would later force an entire country to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, vulnerability, and the darkest possible betrayals within the world of medicine. For it was in these sterile corridors that a young nurse named Niels Högel began a killing spree of unprecedented magnitude, committing acts that would eventually establish him as the most prolific serial murderer in post-war German history. At that time, Högel appeared to many as an enthusiastic, perhaps overly confident member of the clinical team, someone who enjoyed the adrenaline of emergency situations a little more than others. A nurse who volunteered eagerly for resuscitation procedures and seemed energized by the chaos of a life or death moment, earning him the unsettling nickname Lifesaver Rambo, a title that would later become a bitter symbol of irony and horror when the truth about his actions finally surfaced. During his shifts at the Oldenburg and Delmenhorst clinics, a disturbing pattern emerged. Patients who had been stable only hours earlier would suddenly collapse, their heart rhythms crashing into fatal arrhythmias, alarms shrieking throughout the ward as medical teams rushed to perform CPR or administer shocks and fight desperately to bring these individuals back from the brink, unaware that the very person standing beside them, appearing dedicated and ready to intervene, was the architect of the crisis. For Högel was injecting unsuspecting patients with potent cardiovascular drugs, most notably adrenaline, which he used to induce catastrophic cardiac arrests in order to create dramatic emergencies that allowed him to perform aggressive resuscitations, fully aware that many victims would not survive these manufactured disasters. And yet, despite this alarming spike in medical emergencies that seemed to follow his shift patterns like a shadow, institutions failed to detect the hidden truth, and colleagues who sensed something was wrong remained uncertain, confused, or reluctant to accuse one of their own, allowing Högel's deadly activities to continue unchecked for years, as dozens upon dozens of families unknowingly buried loved ones without ever suspecting foul play. The illusion finally shattered in 2005 when a colleague caught him red-handed injecting a 63-year-old patient with a lethal dose of adrenaline, an unforgettable moment that exposed the sinister reality that the emergencies surrounding Högel were not tragic coincidences but calculated acts of lethal manipulation, leading to his arrest and ultimately setting off one of the largest murder investigations in German medical history, as authorities began combing through patient files, analyzing suspicious deaths, and even exhuming more than 130 bodies across Germany, Poland, and Turkey in a desperate attempt to understand the true scope of his crimes. What emerged during this painstaking review was a tapestry of devastation stretching back years, uncovering deaths that had long been attributed to natural causes, but now bore the unmistakable signature of deliberate cardiac manipulation. And as prosecutors gathered evidence and investigators plotted timelines, the confirmed death toll rose to 85 murders, though police strongly suspected the real number of victims exceeded to 100. While some families and advocacy groups argued passionately that the true total might approach or even surpass 300, a number almost too horrific to comprehend. For it meant that hundreds of vulnerable individuals, some as young as 34, others in their 90s, may have spent their final moments unaware that their caregiver was instead their executioner. When the trial in Oldenburg commenced in 2018, and as the world watched Germany grapple with the enormity of its worst serial killer case since World War II, The court heard emotional testimonies from grieving families, desperate to know the truth about what had happened to their parents, spouses, siblings, or children. Many of them living with a tormenting uncertainty because cremations and incomplete records meant some deaths could never be conclusively labeled as murders, leaving them trapped between suspicion and despair, unable to fully mourn without answers. Judge Sebastian Bormann, in delivering the 2019 verdict that confirmed Högel's 85 proven murders, told the court that his crimes were beyond comprehension, remarking that the human mind nearly collapses under the weight of such numbers. A statement that echoed through a courtroom filled with silent grief, disbelief, and anger, as relatives confronted the reality that a man entrusted with saving lives had used his position to carry out acts of unimaginable cruelty. During the proceedings, Högel himself attempted to express remorse, apologizing to families and claiming he had finally understood the enormity of the suffering he had inflicted. Yet many observers questioned his sincerity, recalling that for years he had denied everything, lied to investigators, and even sworn on his daughter's life that he had committed no murders, prompting one expert witness to describe him as a competent liar, a man capable of manipulating not just drugs and heart rhythms but also emotions and perceptions, maintaining a full weight of innocence long after his crimes had mounted beyond measure. Psychiatric experts analyzed his personality and concluded that while he exhibited disturbing traits including a lack of shame, empathy, and guilt, these tendencies were not so severe as to remove accountability, meaning he remained fully responsible under German law, and thus the court imposed the harshest possible sentence, a life imprisonment without any chance of early release due to the severe gravity of guilt, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. But even as the verdict brought a measure of closure, it also raised urgent questions about institutional failures. For the investigation revealed that colleagues in Delmenhorst had noticed suspicious incidents as early as May 2005, and according to prosecutors, should have intervened or reported their concerns. Yet no action was taken until June 22nd, when Högel was finally caught in the act. A delay that may have cost additional lives and led prosecutors to file charges of manslaughter against former colleagues, including senior physicians and ICU supervisors, accusing them of failing to prevent deaths that might have been avoided had warnings been heeded earlier. As the country wrestled with these revelations, public confidence in hospital oversight and medical accountability was shaken, prompting widespread calls for reform, improved monitoring systems, stronger whistleblower protections, and more rigorous auditing of unusual medical patterns, with advocates like Christian Marbach, whose grandfather had been one of Högel's victims, stating that while the conviction was a milestone, it was only one step in a larger journey toward justice, insisting that those in leadership roles who ignored or dismissed warning signs must also face consequences, because protecting vulnerable patients requires not only punishing perpetrators but also confronting systemic failures that allow such tragedies to unfold. And in the years since the case drew headlines around the world, Germany has continued to reflect on the haunting legacy of a nurse who used his access to medication and patient trust as weapons, exposing the terrifying truth that medical settings, places we associate with healing and care, can, under rare but devastating circumstances, become environments where harm is inflicted with alarming ease, especially when warning signs are overlooked or dismissed. A lesson that resonates far beyond the borders of Oldenburg and Delmenhorst, serving as a cautionary reminder to every healthcare system that vigilance is not optional. Transparency is essential, and trust must always be earned and protected with unwavering diligence. Ultimately, the case of Niels Högel stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern European history, a chilling account of a man who turned the role of healer into that of destroyer, manipulating life-saving protocols to create chaos and tragedy, leaving families shattered, institutions humbled, and a nation determined to ensure that such a monstrous betrayal never again takes root in the very places meant to safeguard human life.